Hello. Today I'll be talking about the board game Ankh, Gods of Egypt. This is a game that I received for Christmas this year, and I finally got it out and played it yesterday, so thought I'd do a video on it. So I'll do a setup and how to play and a few example turns, so let's get started with setup. Alright, first we put the game board in the middle of the play area. So all players can reach it. The board is divided into three regions. This region here, and separated by the river is this region. I think it's the Nile Delta region, West Egypt and East Egypt region, something like that. But anyway, at the board, the basic board is divided into three regions. Each player will then choose one of the gods of Egypt that they're going to play. I think there's 5 available to choose. So they'll take the player god board that goes with that god. They'll take the god figure that goes along with the faction or god that they chose. They'll take the 6 matching warrior figures. The merged god dashboard that goes with that god. The matching Ankh tokens that go along. A set of 7 battle cards that go along with their chosen god. A player aid card. If one of the gods chosen is Ra, they'll take these 3 sun tokens. If one of the gods chosen is Osiris, they'll take these 3 underworld tokens. And if one of the gods chosen is Amun, they'll take this Amun token. I'm setting up for a 3-player game, so I'll have the god Isis, Osiris, and all their stuff, and Amun, and all of his stuff. Each player then gets 1 follower token. Randomly choose a first player, or the rules say the first player can be the player who has the most cats. Anyway, however you want to choose the first player, that player will become the first player, and then it'll just go in clockwise order. Players will place 6 of their Ankh tokens on the bottom row here of their god dashboard, like so. Their remaining Ankh tokens are just kept in a supply. We'll place the central dashboard somewhere where all players can reach, along with the devotion track, somewhere like that. In reverse player order, so starting with the last player, they'll place their plastic Ankh token at the bottom of the devotion track. Then the next player in reverse player order, so in this case red, will put theirs on top. And finally the first player, in a 3-player game, will put theirs on top of that. Whenever devotion markers are stacked on top of each other, whichever one is higher on the stack is considered to have more devotion. Otherwise, whichever one is further along the track has more devotion. Take the event marker, put it on the first space of the event track. You take the 4 event markers and place them on the action track in the space corresponding to the number of players. So in this case I'm starting a 3-player game, so I'll put the action track marker there for 3 players. Same with the summon figure marker. Same with the gain followers. And finally the unlock Ankh powers. You'll then choose a scenario from the scenario book. Just make sure that whichever scenario you choose allows the number of players that you have. This is the first scenario in the scenario book, the Middle Kingdoms, and then it shows a player count. And so you'll want to set up the board according to the number of players you have. So for instance, it shows to place an obelisk here on the map. So I'll do that. Now I have the retail version, the Kickstarter version. I don't know how many versions there are, but I know there's like the Kickstarter version that has plastic obelisk and pyramids and temples and metal follower tokens and stuff. I just have the retail version, which has cardboard tokens. Not nearly as nice, but I'm sure much less expensive. And for example, it shows to put a pyramid here, which would be here, and then an Ankh token for player number 3. The colors may not correspond to your player number, but whichever number it shows there is the player number whose figure or Ankh token you will place there. So in this case, it's the third player, which is my last player in a 3-player game, so he'll take one of his Ankh tokens and just put it in that little niche, so in that he controls that pyramid. This icon shows where they'll put their god figure. So I'll put the third player's god figure there, and then this is just where they place one of their warriors. This icon, so that would be here. All right, now go ahead and set up the rest of the board off camera. All right, so I've got the board set up for a 3-player game in the Middle Kingdom scenario. Each of the gods is in their own region. They each control one. Each region has a pyramid monument, an obelisk monument, and a temple monument. And each of the gods controls one monument in their region. So Osiris controls a pyramid there. Isis controls a temple. And Amun controls an obelisk. And then each region has a conflict order token in it. Those don't actually take up a space, they're just in the region to show that's the order you'll do the settle the conflicts in. You'll then randomly pick or agreed upon by all players one level 1. These are the levels here. One level 1 guardian, one of the level 2 guardians, and one of the level 3 guardians to be involved in this game. I'm going to choose for level 1 Satet, for level 2 the Mummy, and for level 3 the Androsphinx. And you can kind of read on there what their powers are. Then, depending on the number of players, you'll place a number of guardian figures next to their cards. In a 3-player game, that's 2 figures for each one. So I've got 2 Satet, 2 mummies, and 2 Androsphinx. Finally, you would follow any additional setup instructions according to the scenario. In this scenario, there's no other setup instructions. You'll go ahead and make a supply of your follower tokens and the rest of your monument and conflict order tokens. You'll also have a set of plastic bases for figures that you may acquire, such as the guardian figures. Other than that, we're set up and ready to go, so we'll start with how to play. Alright, so how do we play? Well, starting with the first player and going clockwise around the table, each player will perform 1 or 2 actions. When you perform an action, you'll decide which one of the actions you want to perform: move figures, summon figures, gain followers, or unlock Ankh powers. You will slide the action marker one space to the right down the track, then you'll perform that action. Then you may perform a second action, but it must be one of the actions lower than the first one you performed. So if your first action was to move figures, then you could do one of the three lower ones: summon figure, gain followers, or unlock Ankh power. However, if your first action was gain followers, then after you've completed that action, your next action could only be to unlock Ankh powers. Now, if your first action would be to move an action marker onto one of these last spaces on the track for that action, that will trigger an event. And if you trigger an event with your first action, you do not get to choose a second action. Likewise, if your first action is to unlock Ankh powers, since there's no action further down the track, that would be the only action you would take this turn. So why don't we start with the different actions. All right, the first action, move figures. If you choose that as an action, you can move any of your figures, any or all of your figures on the board, up to 1, 2, or 3 spaces. Your figures can move across rivers, through monuments, through other figures. You can move your god, 1, 2, 3. So you can move up to 3 spaces. You can move through your own figures, through enemy figures, across rivers, but you have to land on an empty space. You can't land on a space with another figure. You can't land on a space with a monument. You can't land on a space with water. Each space on the board can only hold one figure or monument. So again, you can move, if you take the move figures action, you can move any or all of your figures. So you could move, in this case, he's got 2 figures. He could move both of them or just one of them, and you can move them through any figure, through any monument, as long as you end your movement 1, 2, or 3 spaces in an empty space, and it can't be a water space. All right, the other type of action you could perform is summon figure. If you perform the summon figure action, you can take one of your figures from your supply and place it on the board, either next to one of the figures you already have on the board, or next to or adjacent to a monument you have on the board that you control. So he could place this figure here, or here, or here, or here. It has to be adjacent to a figure you already have on the board. So if he had a figure over here, he could place summon his new figure here. But adjacency means that figures must be in the same region. So this player could not summon a figure to this space because that separates a region. Remember, the rivers here separate the regions, and a space in a different region is not adjacent to a figure in another region. So this space is not adjacent to this space. This space is not adjacent to this figure because that is in a different region. But this is adjacent, this is adjacent, this is adjacent to this figure. Again, you can summon it adjacent to a monument you control. You couldn't summon it next to a neutral monument. It has to be one that's you control, so it's got one of your Ankh markers. And of course, it has to be an empty space and a non-water space, so you couldn't summon it into this water space. And a figure you can summon is, one of your warrior figures that you start with, or later in the game, if you have one of the guardians, you could summon that as well. But anyway, when you take the summon figure action, you can summon one figure that has to be placed adjacent to a figure you already have on the board or to a monument you control on the board. All right, one of the other possible actions you can take is the gain followers action. So you remember you start with one follower, and followers are used to get Ankh powers, or they're used with some of the battle cards. So you'll need to gain more of those throughout the game. So if you take the gain followers action, you can gain one follower for every figure that you have adjacent to a monument you control or adjacent to a neutral monument. If you wouldn't gain any followers for a figure you have that's adjacent to a monument controlled by somebody else. So in this case, if this was the case here and he did the gain followers action, he would just gain one follower because he's got one monument that he controls with a figure next to it. Even though this is a neutral monument, because it's in a different region, he's not considered adjacent to it. However, if this figure was over here and he did the gain followers action, then he would gain two followers because he's got a figure adjacent to a monument he controls, and here he has a figure adjacent to a neutral monument, so he would gain two followers. If his figure was up here, he would not gain a follower for that monument because it's controlled by another player. So again, you only gain followers for monuments that you have a figure next to that you control, or that are neutral and you have a figure next to them. All right, the final type of action you can take is unlock Ankh power. So your Ankh powers are on your God dashboard. They'll give you different benefits. To unlock one, you always unlock starting from the leftmost, and you unlock one in the column above that Ankh token. So you can unlock 2 level 1, 2 level 2s, and 2 level 3s. And you always have to, since you always start with your leftmost, you always have to unlock your 2 level 1s before you can unlock your level 2s and before you unlock your level 3s. And to unlock an Ankh power, you have to spend or sacrifice the number of followers depending on the column you're unlocking. So in this case, if you took this action, you'd have to sacrifice one follower by returning it to the general supply, and then you could move your Ankh token to one of these powers, whichever one you want to get. So maybe like this one, win a battle and gain 3 followers. That's the follower icon. And then after you've gained more follower tokens, the next time you took an unlock Ankh powers, you could then sacrifice one follower and gain a different Ankh power. Now you'll notice when we unlocked this second Ankh power, this guardian symbol appears. When you reveal a guardian symbol, you can take a guardian, if there's one available, of the same level. So this is a level 1 guardian. So we could take one of the 2 level 1 Satet guardians, place a base of our color. So in this case, for the ISIS player, a blue base, you would place that on the guardian's base, and then that figure would go into your pool of available figures for you to summon. And the figure acts just like any of your other figures, but it also has a certain power, like the Satet can end her regular move in an enemy space by moving them one space away. You may choose where to move enemies. So if you had summoned this Satet and then you did a move figures action, you could move 1, 2, and end your movement here and move this figure into a different space. So that's kind of how that power works. If you reveal that Ankh power, or that guardian symbol, and both of the guardians of that symbol, in a 3-player game, you've got 2 of each. If the other 2 players had beat you 2 revealing it, and those guardians of that level were already gone, then you just wouldn't be able to gain a guardian. And if you don't have a base available of one of your bases available that fits the size of that guardian, when you reveal the guardian icon, then you are not able to gain the guardian to your pool. But if you do gain the guardian, it's added to your pool, and then later when you do a summon figure action, you can place that guardian just as placing another figure. You can place that guardian following the same rules as placing one of your warrior figures. And so you'll see when you get here, it costs 2 followers to unlock one of these Ankh powers. And when you finally get to here, it costs 3 followers to unlock one of these Ankh powers. And again, if you end up revealing a guardian symbol here, then you'd be able to take, if there is one, an available level 2 guardian, and the same with the level 3s. And that's all the possible actions. You'll choose an action to take, move the action marker to the right, complete that action. As long as you didn't trigger an event, then you can take one additional lower action. As long as there is a lower action, again, if your first action is the unlock Ankh power, there isn't a lower one, so you would only be able to take one action that turn. If you can take an action even if you can't fulfill it. For instance, if you had no figures in your pool because you've already summoned them all, you could still take the summon figure action, but you just wouldn't gain any benefit from it. However, if you take an action and you can do it, you must do it. So let's talk about events. So again, if you end up taking an action that moves the action marker onto the last space of that action track. For instance, here you took the move figures action, moved it here. You would complete your move figures action. Then you would move the event marker one space along the track. If you move the marker onto one of these symbols like this, then you get to take control. That's a control monument event. And the player that triggered that event, moving that marker onto that icon, gets to take control of one monument, one neutral monument that they have a figure adjacent to. So in this case, if the ISIS player triggered that event, he doesn't have a figure next to a neutral monument, so he would not get to take control of a monument. But if he had moved a figure here previously and then triggered that event and moved it onto a control monument event, then he could take control of this monument because he's got a figure next to it, and he would just take one of his Ankh markers and put it under there, controlling that monument. Again, it has to be, you have to have a figure adjacent to it. So if, as we showed previously, if his figure was here, even though this monument looks adjacent, it is not, because it's in a different region, so he wouldn't be able to take control of that monument. If it's later in the game and there were no neutral monuments left on the board and you had a figure next to an opponent's monument, then you could take control of that monument instead, switching out your Ankh token for his Ankh token. But again, that only happens if there are no neutral monuments left on the board and you have a figure adjacent to an opponent's monument. Alright, so each time an event is triggered, the marker will move along. If you move the marker onto a conflict icon, the player who triggered the event that moved the event marker onto the conflict event will take the battle tiebreaker token. So for instance, if the blue player took the move figures action, which moved the action marker onto the event space there, he would take this battle tiebreaker token. Alright, so when the conflict event is triggered, the regions, the conflicts will be resolved in each region in conflict region order. So This is the region 1, conflict region 1, region 2, region 3. So you'll start with 1, then go to 2, then to 3. If there is a region that doesn't have any figures in it, then that region will just be skipped and you'll go to the next region that has figures. If a region has only figures of one player in it, kind of how we're set up right now, where each region only has the figures of one player in it, then that player is said to dominate that region. So if we were going to resolve region 1 because there's only the figures of one player in it, the ISIS player, that player dominates the region. If you dominate a region, you will gain 1 devotion for dominating the region. So you would move your marker up on the devotion track, and then you gain 1 devotion for each monument majority that you have in that region. And what that means is if you control the most of a certain, like if you control the most pyramids in that region, then you'll get another devotion point. If you control the most obelisks in that region, you'll get another point. If you control the most temples in that region. Now in this case, the ISIS player controls the most temples. There's only 1 temple in there, and he controls it, so he controls the most temples in that region. So for that, he would get 1 more devotion. Now he doesn't control any pyramids or obelisks in there, so he won't get devotion for those. If another player happened to have a temple in here, because later in the game you'll be able to build monuments. So if perhaps, a player came in here and built a temple and they controlled it, so they each controlled 1 temple, then the ISIS player would not gain the devotion for the temple majority because they would not have the majority. Now, if they had 2 temples that they controlled in here and another player only had 1 temple they controlled in here, then they would have the majority for that monument, so they would score 1 devotion. So again, if you dominate the region, you're the only one with figures in there. You get 1 devotion for dominating the region, and then 1 devotion for each of the monument types that you have a majority of in that region. If you move on to region 2, and it perhaps looked like this, where there is more than 1 player's figures in there, like here we have player 3 has a figure and player 2 has 2 figures in there, then nobody dominates that region. To dominate it, you have to be the only one with figures in here. So since more than 1 player has figures in here, then there'll be a battle between the players who have figures in that region. So when there's going to be a battle in the region, the players involved in the battle each pick up their battle cards and choose 1 of the battle cards and put it face down in front of them. That's the one they're going to present or use this during this battle. Now, once you've played a battle card, then that battle card stays face up in play. You won't have it available to you again in any future battles until you finally play your cycle of Ma'at card. I don't know how to pronounce that, Ma'at. When you play this card, then at the end of the battle you can reclaim all of your used battle cards, including this one. So otherwise, once you play a card in a battle, it stays face up in front of you and you won't have that available to you in future battles. But back to how we resolve a battle. So each player would pick 1 card and put it in front of them. After the players have chosen their battle cards, they reveal the cards that they chose. Then if a player chose the Build Monuments battle card, that would be resolved. If no player resolved the Build Monuments battle card, or chose the Build Monuments battle card, next you would resolve the Plague of Locusts battle cards, since neither player chose that. Then you determine monument majority, similar to when you have domination, and award players one devotion for each monument majority they have, starting in reverse devotion order. So the player with the lowest devotion, if they had monument majority, a monument majority of one monument in this region, then they would uh, move their devotion, their marker up on the devotion track first. But in this case, only the Amun player has a majority of one type of monument, the obelisk. So he would he would gain one devotion for that. If he had had a majority of pyramid and obelisk, then he would move it up two. But anyway, you determine monument majority of the players involved in the battle, and award them a devotion for each majority that they have. Then you determine the battle resolution by adding the total strength of each player. Each figure adds 1 point of strength. Now there could be a guardian power. If you had the guardian in there, that may count toward your strength. There may be a god power. Each god has their own power, which we haven't talked about, but I'll go over those, at least for those in play here shortly. Or there may be an Ankh power that affects your strength. For instance, here, this resplendent power, your god's base strength is 3 if you control at least 3 monuments of the same type. But in this case, nobody has any Ankh powers or god powers that would affect the strength in this battle. So the Amun's player strength is 2 against the Osiris player strength of 1. Your battle cards may add to your strength. So for instance, the Osiris player played chariots, which increases his strength by 3. So that gives him a total of 4 strength, where the Amun player, his increases his strength by 1, which only gives him a strength of 3. So even though the Amun player had more figures here, when you're resolving this battle, he's going to have 3, 4, a total of 4 against a total of 3, so the Osiris player will win the battle. For winning the battle, you gain 1 devotion, so the Osiris player would move his devotion marker up 1, and then you kill all enemy figures in the region, except gods cannot be killed, so the red player would have to remove his 1 figure there. The god would stay. Any other enemy figures, guardians, and so forth, would be removed unless the guardian had a power that may put it back. For instance, the mummy guardian, if your mummy is killed, it is immediately resummoned adjacent to your god. If 2 or more players tied for the most strength and one of the players had the tiebreaker token, then they would win the battle because they have that token. Once you use the token in one battle, it can only be used in one battle during a conflict resolution. So if you used it to break a tie, you flip it over and it's not available again during that battle or during that conflict event. If players tie for strength and neither one has the tiebreaker token, for instance like this, the Isis player had the tiebreaker token, which he wasn't involved in this battle. So these 2 players, if they had tied, then both basically lose, and they all lose all their figures except for their gods, which can't be killed. If the Amun player here in our example lost the battle, but if he had won, his devotion reward for winning this battle is increased by 1 for each of his figures in the desert, which are the yellow desert spaces. So if he would have won, he would have um, got a devotion for winning and 2 extra devotion for having um, 2 figures in the desert. So that's the effect of that battle card. And then you'd go on and resolve conflict region 3. That one, because there's only a figure of one player type in there, that would be a domination. So he would get the 1 for dominating the region and 1 for controlling the most pyramids in there. And we'll just go ahead and look at the battle cards. Each player's battle cards are the same. So we said this one gives you +3 to your strength. This one gives you +0 to your strength, but allows you to get all your cards back after you've played it. The Plague of Locust cards adds 1 to your strength, plus it requires all players in the region that are taking part in the battle to take their follower tokens that they have in their play area and bid a certain amount of their choosing of their follower tokens. Whichever player ends up bidding the most follower tokens kills off all the um, figures of the other players involved in that battle, except for gods, of course. But any follower tokens bid in this manner are sacrificed and go back into the global supply. If 2 players tie for the highest bid in followers when the Plague of Locust is played, then everybody loses and all the figures, warriors and guardians, are killed, except for gods, of course, for all players. The Flood card, when revealed, you gain 1 follower for each of your figures in a fertile region. The fertile regions are the green regions. These ones are the desert regions. So you gain 1 follower for each of your figures in the fertile region, fertile spaces in the region. And those figures can't be killed during the battle resolution. So even if you lost the battle, any figures you had that were in fertile spaces in that battle would not be killed off. Now that is to say they can't be killed off from battle resolution. However, if a player played the Plague of Locust cards and the player that played the Flood card lost the bid, then his figures would still be killed off. This would not save him from that. Alright, another battle card you can play which adds 0 to your strength. This one you may play if you think you're going to lose. After the battle resolution, gain 1 devotion for each of your figures killed during this battle, including the Plague of Locusts. So again, you would gain devotion for every one of your figures that you had that were killed off. And the only other battle card we haven't talked about is the Build Monuments. When you reveal that, you have to sacrifice 3 followers, and that allows you to build and control one of the type of monuments, temple, pyramid, or obelisk, in the region. And again, that's one of the first things done after you reveal cards. Then the next step is if somebody did a build monument, they would get to build monuments. Or a monument, if they can sacrifice 3 followers. Now there is a god power here an Ankh power here that lets you, if you have inspiring, your monument cost is 0 followers to build. So if you play that build monument card and you have that Ankh power, you don't have to sacrifice 3 followers. You're just allowed to build a monument. Let's look at the god powers for the gods that we have out here. Isis, they have their god power of each of your figures adjacent to an enemy figure is considered protected. Protected figures can't be killed during battle resolution unless you allow it. Now, they could still be killed from Plague of Locusts, I assume, but not from battle resolution, where if you added strength and had less strength than one of the other players, and then you normally would kill off figures. If your figure was adjacent to an enemy figure, you wouldn't have to kill it off. Osiris's God Power. If you lose a battle, you may place one of your underworld tokens, that's these, which you got 3 at the beginning of the game if you're Osiris. You can place or move one of your underworld tokens into any empty non-water space in the region that the battle took place. Monuments and enemy figures cannot occupy an underworld space. When you do the summon figures action, you can summon one extra figure into any one underworld space. And finally, Amun's God Power is once during each conflict event, you may play 2 battle cards in a single battle. Resolve both, adding their strength bonuses together. You must declare you're playing 2 bonus cards before your opponents commit to the cards of their choice. Then, once you've done that, you flip this. If you decide to play 2 battle cards in a battle, then you'll flip this token over, showing that you cannot play 2 cards in a future battle during that same conflict event. Now, during another conflict event that comes up later in the game, you can flip this back over and have that ability again. Alright, I think that pretty much covers conflict events. Oh, again, after the conflict event is over, the player that took the conflict tiebreaker token just puts that back so it's available to whoever triggers the next conflict. But the final event that we haven't talked about is the camel event. I guess it's called the Camel Caravan event. So when a player triggers an event that moves the token onto the Camel Caravan event, what that lets them do is split a region into 2 smaller regions. So that player can take up to 6 of these camel miniatures, and then they will place those camels on hex borders to create another region. For instance, here. Both regions created have to be at least 6 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this one is more than 6. And then this one you can see is far more than 6. When you're placing your camels, they have to connect either rivers or water spaces or the edge of the board or to other camels to create the new region. So you can't just have them end in the middle of somewhere. They have to connect, either an edge of a board to a water space or a water space to a river or an edge of a board to a river. Anyway, so you're creating 2 regions with your camels, basically separating regions and creating a new region. You then decide which of the regions you just split to keep the original conflict order token, and then you'll take the next lowest conflict order token out of the supply. So since we've used 1, 2, and 3, the next lowest would be 4, so we would take that out of the supply and put that in our new region. And then you have the option of swapping the conflict order token of one of the regions you just split with one of the other conflict order tokens on the board. So maybe you want these regions to resolve last, so maybe you swap the 1 with the 3. Anyway, now you've created a new region on the board. So when you resolve conflicts, now there'll be another region to resolve and score devotion in. So one thing we haven't talked about, after you take an action which results in an event, you move the event marker, resolve that event, and then you move that action marker back to the beginning of the track. So in a 3-player game, that would be there. And then it's available to move down the track again until it reaches the event, triggers another event, and then it gets moved back again. All right, so we've talked about all the different type of events. Next thing I guess we need to talk about is the item of controversy in this game, which is after you get past the third conflict, as noted here, in a 3, 4, or 5 player game, then the two players that are in last place on the devotion track will merge into one god. And thereafter, those players will play as a team. So let's talk about what happens when the two lowest players on the devotion track merge into the one god. So for an example, we'll say we finish resolving the third conflict event, and this is where the devotion track stands. The player on the second lowest player on the devotion track is the higher merging god, and the god lowest on the devotion track is the lower merging god. So first thing you would do is destroy all monuments controlled by the lower merging god. So, of course, there would be more monuments controlled by the lower merging god than just the one as we show now. But you would remove the monument and the Ankh token. You also remove their god, and any other monuments they control are destroyed. You also go ahead and remove the warriors, battle cards, a pool of Ankh tokens, and all that out of the game from the lower merging god. If the lower merging god had some guardian figures, the higher merging god can take control of those by taking the bases, his bases, and swapping them for the lower merging god's bases. Then on the devotion track, you take the higher merging god's Ankh token and place it on top of the lower merging god's Ankh token. Going forward, they'll move together as one Ankh token when devotion is gained. The lower god will then take one of their colored bases and place it on the higher god, showing that they are now one merged god. The lower merging god will move adjust their Ankh powers to match that of the higher moving god. So in this case, if the higher moving god's Ankh powers were set like this, and the lower moving gods were lower merging gods were set like this, they would adjust theirs to match what the higher merging god has, like so. So their Ankh powers will always stay in sync going forward. The merged god also has the special god power of both the merged gods. So the players will exchange the merged god dashboards with the other player, so they have a reference to what the god power is of the other player, because they now have both. They both now have, or the merged god has the powers of both. The merged god, the two players that are the merged god will control the warrior pool from the higher god. Those will be their pool of available warriors, as well as the guardians that were kept and any followers that the higher merged god had. That will be their available pool. Going forward, the merged god players will continue to take turns as normal, except they will only take one action on their turn. The other player that's the merged god can take the same action on their turn. They don't have to take a lower action on the action track. But again, they each can only take one action, and they control the god and figures of the higher merged god. And so they'll continue to take their turns like that in the same turn order, only they'll be controlling the one god and his warriors. They'll have the powers, god powers of both, and they'll both have the same Ankh powers. If one player on his action unlocks a new Ankh power, the other player will also unlock that Ankh power on his dashboard. They always stay in sync. If a new guardian was received from unlocking an Ankh power, it gets the base of the higher merged god. And again, both players, when they take an action, are able to control those warriors or guardians of the higher merged god. During a battle, they'll use the higher merged god's battle cards, and they'll both make the decision or together try to make the decision on what battle card to play. If there's a disagreement, the higher merged god player makes the final decision. And now that since they're merged god and their Ankh tokens move together up the devotion track, they will either win or lose together. So that's, I guess, kind of a catch-up mechanism. There, some people like it, some don't. I have no opinion since I've only played the game one time. But that covers all the events, all the actions. So let's talk about how you win the game. A player or players, if they're a merged god, win immediately if their Ankh marker reaches the top, the last space of the devotion track. One thing I should have talked about previously, after this conflict event here, if any gods still have their Ankh token in the red section of the devotion track, they're just eliminated from the game. So when that happens, if there's only one god still left in play because they were in the blue section of the devotion track, then they will immediately win the game. And if neither of those things happen by the time the event marker reaches the last event, conflict event space, then after that conflict event is resolved, the player who is highest on the devotion track wins the game. And remember I mentioned earlier, if two players are on the devotion track on the same space, whichever one on top is considered to have more devotion. So if the game ended in this configuration, the red player would end up winning since his token is on top there. So that pretty much covers the rules and how you play the game, all the possible actions and events. So why don't I get it set back up to how it was right after setup, and then we'll go through a few example turns. Alright, I believe I've got everything set back how it should be at the start of the game. So the blue player is our first player, so he'll take the first turn. So we'll say for his first action, he is going to summon figures. So he gets to take one of the warriors from his pool, and he can place that adjacent to one of his figures, or a monument he controls. So we'll just say he's going to place it there. Now he can take another action, but it has to be one of the two actions lower than the summon figures. So I think he's going to do an unlock Ankh powers action. So because he's in the first column here of Ankh powers, it costs one follower, which he has because that's what you start with at the beginning of the game. So he'll sacrifice that, and I think he's going to get the monuments cost 0 to build Ankh power. Alright, that's his action. So now we go to the red player, and now he can take an action. And to show something different, we'll say he's going to take the move figures action, so he'll advance the marker. And, oh, I forgot to take this base off here. Let me do that. Okay, there's that. So now he can move any or all of his figures up to 3 spaces. They just can't end in a water space or in a space with another token or figure. So he's going to move this one 1, 2, and we'll have him move this one 1, 2. Alright, that's going to be his move figures action. And then we'll have him do, he has to do one lower, so he could do any of the 3 actions lower. We'll say he's going to do the gain followers action. And with that one, he gains 1 follower for each monument that he controls or that is neutral, that he has any figures adjacent to. Well, he's got a figure adjacent to this monument and a figure adjacent to this monument, so he'll gain 2 followers. So we'll take that from the general supply and add that to him, and that is his 2 actions. Alright, now we come to the Osiris player. We'll say he's going to move figures also, so he'll advance the move figures marker on the track, and then he'll move this one 1, 2, 3, and maybe he's just going to leave that guy there. So that's he'll be done with the move figures. And then maybe he wants to unlock an Ankh power as well, so he'll advance that. He can do that because it's lower than the move figures action. So we'll have him unlock an Ankh power also. We'll just say he'll do this one, which when you gain followers, you gain +1 follower. And of course he'll have to sacrifice 1 follower to get that Ankh power. Alright, now we're back to the Isis player. We'll say he wants to move figures as well, so he's going to advance that, and he'll move this one here, and maybe he wants to move this one 1, 2, 3. Now you can move across a water space, you just can't end your movement in a water space. And then he could also move this figure, but we'll just say for now he's going to leave it there. And now he can do another action as long as it's 1 lower. We'll say he's going to do the gain followers action. And again, he'll now get to gain 1 follower for each monument neutral or one that he controls that he has a figure adjacent to. He now has figures adjacent to this neutral monument, and this one he controls. So he will gain 3 followers. We'll add those to his supply, and that'll be the end of his turn. Alright, we're back to the Amun player's turn. We'll say he wants to do a summon figures action, so he gets to summon a figure from his pool adjacent to one of his figures or monuments. So he'll take one of his warriors and he'll summon that down here adjacent to one of his monuments. That's one he controls. It's got his control Ankh token there. Now he gets to take another action. It has to be one of the lower ones. We'll say he's going to go ahead and unlock Ankh powers, and that will also trigger an event. But first he'll complete that action. So he'll spend a follower to unlock an Ankh power in his first column. So he'll spend that. And we'll say he just gets this one, that at the start of conflict event, he gains a follower for each region where he has figures. And now, because he moved to the last space of that unlock Ankh powers track, he triggers an event, so we move the event marker. And because this is icon we landed on, that's the control monuments event, so the person that triggered that gets to gain control of one monument that they have a figure adjacent to, a neutral. So we'll say he's going to take control of this temple. So he'll put one of his control markers there. Now, if there were no neutral monuments left on the board and he had a figure next to another player's controlled monument, then he could take control of that one. But there's plenty of neutral monuments left on the board, so he had his choice of this one or this one. He chose this one to take control of the temple. And now after that event has been resolved, we move this tracker back to the start of the track, and for a 3-player game, this is the start space. Alright, now we're back to the Osiris player. We'll say he wants to do a summon figures action, so now he gets to summon one of his warriors, and he gets to place that adjacent to one of his figures he already has on the board or one of his monuments. He will place it, we'll say he'll place it over here adjacent to his god. And then for his second action, he's going to, it can only be one of these two. He'll do a gain followers. So again, he gets to gain 1 follower for each monument, neutral or one that he controls that he's got a figure adjacent to. He's got one adjacent to that one and one to that one, so he'll gain 2 followers. And that will be his 2 actions. And then we'll be back to the Isis player. I'm going to go ahead and play ahead a little bit off camera until we get to the conflict event and see something we haven't seen yet. Well, I found something else we haven't seen yet. Played ahead just a little bit. It's the Amun red player's turn. He's taking his second action. He's going to do an unlock Ankh powers. And so he's going to spend 1 follower. He still has to unlock a second Ankh power here in this first column, so he's going to spend 1 follower as the cost is still only 1. He'll do this if you win a battle, you gain 3 followers, but that does reveal a guardian, so he gets to take a level 1 guardian and put one of his bases on it, like so. And then that will go in his pool of available figures he can summon. And remember, the power of the Setet is that it can end its move in an enemy's space and then move that enemy 1 space away. Alright, to show something a little different here, we're back to the Isis player's turn. He hasn't taken an action yet. For his first action, he's going to take the unlock Ankh powers. Now, that won't allow him a second action for 2 reasons. First of all, because his first action is triggering event, he wouldn't be able to take another action, but he also wouldn't be able to take another action anyway, since he's taken the lowest one on the lowest available action, and there's not one lower. Because of that reason, he wouldn't be able to take a second action also. So there's 2 reasons he would not be able to take a second action here. But let's have him unlock his Ankh power. He's still in column 1, so he's got to spend a follower. He's going to take this one. Now, that reveals a guardian symbol, so he would normally get a guardian, but there's no level 1 guardians left to take. The red player took one already, and the green player took one already, so unfortunately, he just doesn't get a level 1 guardian. But that does advance the event marker, so he gets to gain control of a monument that he has a figure adjacent to, so he'll gain control of this one next to his god, and then he'll reset that tracker. Alright, that brings us to Red's turn. We'll have him do the move figures action, and we'll say he's going to move this figure here 1 space, and I don't know, maybe he'll move this one 1, 2, 3. So he moved 2 figures there. He could still move these, but he's going to leave those where they are. That's going to trigger event, so he won't get to take another action. So let's trigger the event. That's going to take us to the first conflict event. Okay, so the first thing that happens, the player that triggered the conflict event gets to take the tiebreaker token, put that in their play area. That was the Amun player here. All right, now we'll resolve each region in conflict marker order, starting with region 1. So in this region, blue is the only player that has any figures in there, so he's going to dominate that region. So he'll get 1 devotion for dominating the region, and then he gets 1 devotion for each monument majority he has in that region. Well, he controls the most obelisks, the most temples, and the most pyramids, so that's 3 more devotion he's going to get. Alright, next we come to region number 2. Red is the only player with figures in this region, so he will dominate this region. He'll get 1 point for dominating the region, and then he's got the most obelisks and temples, so he'll get 2 more. So he'll get 3 devotion. And I forgot this at the start of the conflict, because he has this power at the start of the conflict event. He gains 1 follower for each region where he has any figures. He's got figures in this region and this region, so he should have got 2 followers, so we'll give those to him. Alright, so finally we come to region 3, and in this region there is not anybody that dominates it, because there's both Moon figures and Osiris figures in here. So we'll have a battle in this region. So the players involved, which in this case is going to be the Osiris player and the Amun player, they will both select one of their battle cards and place it face down. Alright, so they've both selected their battle cards. We'll have them reveal. They reveal them simultaneously. The Osiris player picked Build Monument, and the Amun player picked Miracle. So then the very next step is, if any played Build Monument in reverse devotion order, they get to do that. Well, the Osiris player did play that. So he can sacrifice 3 followers to build and control a temple, pyramid, or obelisk anywhere in the region. Well, he doesn't have to pay any followers, because he has this Ankh power. Monument costs 0 to build. So he's going to build we'll say he's going to build a pyramid. So he's going to take a pyramid token. He can put it anywhere in the region. So we'll say he's going to put it right here, and then he takes one of his control tokens and places that there. Alright, next, if anyone played a Plague of Locust cards, that would be resolved, but nobody did. This player played the Miracle card. Neither one of these players' card is going to add any to their strength total, but the Miracle card, after battle resolution, gain 1 devotion for each of your figures killed during this battle. Alright, next we do Monument Majority. So each player will receive 1 devotion for each monument majority they have. So it probably would have been a better idea for Osiris to build a different type of monument, because then he would have had the majority in at least 2 types of monuments instead of 1. So unfortunately, because I did that bonehead move, the Osiris player has majority in 1 type of monument, pyramids, so he'll get 1 devotion for that. And the red player doesn't have any monument majority in that region, so he won't get anything. And finally, we do battle resolution. We add up the strength, 1 point for each figure. So the green player will get 1 point for his god, and then 3 for his figures in that region. So he has a total of 4. He doesn't get anything else from any cards or anything, so it has 4. The red Amun player only has 2 figures in that region, so his strength is only 2. He didn't add any from his card or from any powers he had. So he's going to lose the battle. So both of his warriors are killed and go back into his pool. Now, because he did play this power, after the battle resolution, he gains 1 devotion for each of his figures killed in the battle. So he'll actually gain 2, 1, 2 devotion for that. Because the green player won the battle resolution, he does get 1 devotion for that. Now, the Amun player did have his power where once during a conflict event he could have played 2 battle cards. Now, both their battle cards will stay face up in their play area. They won't have those available to them in a future battle until they play that Cycle of Ma'at card that lets them get their cards back. Alright, the Moon player didn't ever use the tiebreaker token. That'll go back for somebody else to get next time they trigger a conflict event. That event has been resolved now, so the marker will move back to the start of the Move Figures track. And because this player triggered an event with his action, he doesn't get to take another action, so we would go on to the Osiris player. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I think we've seen a lot of the different actions and stuff and how it works. After 1 play, I'll just say the game didn't really grab me, but again, that's 1 play and that's playing by myself, so I really can't make a judgment on it just after 1 play. But you know, this game does have a pretty high score on Board Game Geek. I think like a 7.9 or something. So I thought I would enjoy it a little more than I did. But I don't know. It's hard for me. It's hard for me to say after 1 play. But I will just say after 1 play, I didn't have a lot of fun playing it. But I'll definitely play it when I have a group of people to play with before I make a final decision on my thoughts of it. You know, from what I've read on the Board Game Geek forums on this game, you know, there's a lot of subtlety and nuance to the play. Just doing this playthrough after my rules explanation, I am getting a little more of it than I did on my first playthrough by myself. But still, hopefully next time I play it, I enjoy it a little more than I did the first time. But I think I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.